Okay, thank you so much. Now we have the totally filled room, and it's very high-level debate that we have today. And I'd like to remind that it's open to public, and this hearing will focus on violence in sport and safeguarding within the framework of the preparation of our report on protecting human rights in and through sport, obligations and shared responsibilities. And this hearing will be video recorded and published on the PACE website. So I wish to warmly welcome our guest experts. Olivia Jasriel, former South African and international tennis player and founder of the Jasriel Foundation, South Africa's only organization focused on protecting athletes against child abuse. Olivia. Patrice, Evra, former captain of Manchester United and the French national football team, an abuse survivor and campaigner against abuse in sport and beyond. Maud Deboe-Bukikyo, chair of the ECPAT Global NGO Network, working to end the sexual exploitation of children, and a former Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe. We welcome you. Alistair Bell, Deputy Secretary General of FIFA, and Joyce Cook, Senior Advisor to the FIFA President, dealing with the creation of a safe sport entity. Kit McConnell, Sport Director of the IOC, and Kirsty Burrows, Senior Manager of the IOC Safe Sport Unit. Ashley Eller, Deputy Secretary General and Legal Director of the International Ice Hockey Federation. Mr. Simon Mason, Head of Sports Strategy, Department for Culture, Media and Sport, United Kingdom. And Alexander Hustin, Chair of the Governing Board of the Council of Europe's Enlarged Partial Agreement on Sport. You will find more details in the information document, which includes their short bios, and this hearing will consist of 2 sessions, each of around 60 minutes. The first one on understanding violence in sport will be moderated by Ms. Emily Logan, Commissioner Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, Ireland. The second session on addressing violence in sport responses at national and international level will be moderated by Lord George Vokes. Thank you, Lord George. They will be followed by a final short roundtable so that each guest speaker could make a conclusive statement. Of course, before closing the hearing, I will give the floor to our newly appointed rapporteur, Mr. Kim Valentin. The moderators will ask initial questions to the panelists and then moderate the ensuing Q&A session and discussion with the panelists. I kindly ask panelists to respect the time which has been allocated to them for their first replies, which is up to 5 minutes and no more. We know that each of you has a lot to say, but I'm sure that many of us have questions, and question and answers are an essential part of our hearing. So I kindly ask the moderators to be strict in their time management. So we can start the first panel, and Ms. Logan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. It's a great privilege to be here and to moderate this first session. Our first speaker, as you said, is Olivia Jasriel, founder of the Olivia Jasriel Foundation Athletes Against Child Abuse South Africa. Olivia, as you may know already, is one of Bob Hewitt's victims. Olivia played international tennis in her youth and is still actively involved in the sport. She has worked tirelessly and fearlessly in her personal capacity in various organisations over the past 13 years to bring sexual predators in the sporting fraternity to justice. She has extensive experience in the lodging of cases and court process of both current and historic abuse cases. She has a biography which is available to you all, and my apologies for having to shorten it. I need to keep to time. So I will begin with our first question to you, Olivia, which is, in your experience, what are the main challenges that victims of abuse in sport face, and how can we address them?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute
Please, mic has to be on.
Can you hear me now? Hello? Yeah. Thanks for having me here. It's a great honor to be here and be a part of this. I'd like to start off by saying victims of abuse in sports face numerous challenges, including power imbalances, fear, absence of accountability, which at this point I'm starting to think is the biggest problem, and we have very, very low conviction rates. I can quote that in South Africa, it's 0.7% conviction rates of sexual violence. It's important to recognize the vulnerability of our children and address these issues with a focus on prevention and measures to protect and support victims. Furthermore, action is needed at both national and international levels, considering that sports federations often tend to self-prioritize and self-preserve. One of the significant challenges faced by victims, and I can attest to these challenges as a victim myself and what I went through when I was just a 12-year-old girl who was being raped on a regular basis by my tennis coach. It's the power imbalance that exists within the sporting setting. Coaches, officials, and administrators often hold positions of authority and control over the athletes, making it extremely difficult for the victims to speak up. The power dynamic can generate a fear of retribution while they're still playing the sport, and that is why victims often speak out after they have left the sport. Dismissal of claims, where they are just simply not believed, and the issues are swept under the carpet. And then there's the threat to the athlete's career. To address this, it is crucial to establish clear reporting mechanisms and independent oversight bodies that can ensure accountability and protect the rights of victims. Another challenge is the absence of accountability. And then we have, as I said earlier, the low conviction rates in the cases of abuse in sport. This can be attributed to several factors, including inadequate investigation procedures. I don't believe that it is for a federation to do an internal investigation on a criminal matter. That is for the authorities to do. Lack of proper legal frameworks and the tendency of sport federations to prioritize their own reputations and, again, self-preservation. It is all about the reputation and preserving the reputation of the federation. There is very, very little about the preserving and the even preserving the reputation of the victim themselves. To overcome these challenges, there needs to be a concerted effort to strengthen the legal frameworks, enhance the investigation procedures, and encourage transparency and impartiality, which we are seeing none of that at the moment, in the handling of the abuse cases. It's essential to create an environment where the rights of the victims are prioritized over organizational interests. The vulnerability of children in sport is another critical concern. And me again, as a little 12-year-old, I was extremely vulnerable. I was taken huge advantage of, and my life was destroyed. And people have said to me, he's free now, he's paid his price. I will live in my jail box forever. Forever. Young athletes are often targeted due to their limited understanding of boundaries and the desire to please the authority figures. Prevention measures must be implemented, such as comprehensive background checks for coaches and staff, extremely strict code of conduct, and that is not only for the federations and the sport and the coaches, but for the parents and the children as well, and mandatory child protection training. Educating children, parents, coaches, and administrators about recognizing and reporting abuse is also vital in reducing vulnerabilities and promoting a safe environment. To address these challenges effectively, action is required at both international and national levels. And I do really, really hope that today we can all take this matter seriously, take this home and think, what if it happened to my child? What would I do? Or what would I expect the Federation to do? Nationally, governments should establish robust legal frameworks, I've said that before, that explicitly address abuse in sport and provide adequate resources for investigation, prosecution, and victims' support. And these should be at the same level as the anti-doping, in my opinion. The federations go all out when a victim or when a person is accused of doping, yet you accuse a coach of sexual abuse or abuse, and it's not treated with the same urgency or respect. National sport organisations must prioritise prevention and accountability They must implement the policies that protect athletes and ensure proper consequences for perpetrators. At an international level, collaboration between sports federations, governments, and organizations such as the International Olympic Committee, IOC, and international sports body is absolutely crucial. Gold standards and guidelines should be developed to address abuse in sport consistently across different countries and sports disciplines. Sharing best practices, support research, and providing resources for victim support can facilitate a coordinated response to the issue. In conclusion, I'm nearly done. The challenges faced by the victims of abuse in sport, including power imbalances, fear, absence of accountability, and low conviction rates, highlight the urgent need for comprehensive prevention measures and support systems. Addressing these challenges requires action at national and international levels, and I will keep on saying that until the day I die. And then there's the involving governments, sports federations, and national and international organizations. But by prioritizing the protection of athletes and the well-being of victims, we can create a safer and more inclusive sporting environment.
Olivia, thank you very much. We may feel uncomfortable hearing some of that information, but I don't underestimate how difficult that is to come here today and to speak of something that is so personal to you. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is Patrice Evra. Patrice Evra was a former captain of Man United and the French national team, an abuse survivor and campaigner against abuse in sport and beyond. I would just mention and encourage, for those of you who hear Patrice and Olivia speak, they use two different terms. Olivia's choice is to describe herself as a victim, and Patrice's choice is to describe himself as a survivor. So in terms of questions and answers, I would ask you to respect their choices. A much revered captain of Man United and the French national team, Patrice Evra is a consummate modern sportsman, a successful entrepreneur with his I Love This Game brand and a myriad of other endeavours. He aims to help spread positivity and inspire people to maximise their potential. Naturally, he draws on the challenges he faced, from poverty to racism to sexual abuse at the age of 13. In this latest chapter of his life, Patrice's main focus is to join the fight to end violence against children, to use his platform to raise the voice and visibility of those affected around the world. It's our honour to have you here today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say, Patrice. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I will never dream to be in this kind of room with so many powerful people and will be able to change the faith of children. I call myself a survivor because I think in life things happen, and saying I'm being a victim, I'm not here to look for any pity. I'm just here as a witness. I'm not an expert, because no matter if I've been sexually abused at the age of 13 by my head teacher, is something I survive, but in which price? It cost me a lot. I always hold my emotion. I wasn't able to cry. I lost, like some of my friends, when my brother died, when I was going in funeral, and I never shed a tear. And I was always thinking, because I come from the street, I am a tough guy, and that's the reason, but he wasn't. And I opened myself, thanks to my beautiful wife, and she helped me to get rid of that toxic masculinity by watching a program about pedophile. And she see my face change. She said, "What's the matter, Patrice?" I say, "No, nothing." Then she said, "Come on, we don't have to lie between each other. What's the matter?" Then, for the first time, I share the story. It happened when I was 13 years old, and I shared that story at 38. And the massive challenge was to tell that to my own mom. And of course, when I traveled to Paris and she was devastated and saying sorry, I said, "No, mommy, you don't have to say sorry. I'm a happy person." And like Olivia said, when you get abused or whatever, you don't talk. It's not easy to talk because you feel guilty, you feel shame about yourself, and also you don't know if people will believe you. So it is a really difficult challenge. But I made it. And it's a statistic, it's really amazing. It's 1 of 2 children experience any kind of violence in his childhood. 1 of 2 children. I mean, half of a football team, half of a school, classroom, half of this room. We don't know who we are next to each other, but we never talk. That's why I'm using my platform. I write my book 2 years ago to spread the message. After I opened myself, so many really important and famous athletes text me and say, Patrice, this happened to me. And I didn't force them to talk. Say, if you want to talk, I will always be here to support you. But now I want those big institutions to make sure the football or any kind of sport is safe. Those children need us. I have a really successful career. I have a wonderful life. Every single day I'm a happy person and feel blessed and grateful. But I think right now, ending the violence of children is my main goal in life. I must have this new generation. Communication is a key. It's a way about communicate. And using those social media, that's my best way to do it. For example, when I was fighting against the racism, I was dancing and disguised as a panda because he's white, black, and chubby. And my message at the end was like, say stop to the bullies and the racism. So I think communication is a case. I know a lot of institutions, we're doing a lot of movement, but we need to adapt. For example, in this room, I don't see any kids. And trust me, they have a voice. And they got things to say. I had a Zoom call with 3 wonderful kids for change makers. And the way they were talking, I couldn't believe the charisma and all of that. So like Olivia said, we have an anti-doping. We're trying to eradicate the racism in sport. But what about those children? What about those children? And I talk with people and they say, yeah, but it will take 10, 15 years. Yes, it will take a long time. We won't do it one clip and everything will change. But we have to start now. It's an emergency. That's why I want all the people gathering in this room, when they go home, they think about those kids, they think about Olivia, they think about myself, I meet like a little girl. She was being raped, practicing our sport by his coach, by her coach. And this is, we need to stop it now. It's an emergency. I know people really feel uncomfortable when we're talking about children and sexually abused or whatever. We need to break that taboo. I am here to break the taboo. I am here to put all my effort, all my determination and my passion to stop that. Because I don't want any children to experience what we experience. And I put myself in example, but it's billions of children being sexually abused, billions of children. And they are the future. That's it.
Patrice, thank you so much. It's very difficult to follow that, but just to echo the importance of children and those billion children on behalf of who you're advocating today, and what powerful and courageous testimony you have given us today. Thank you very much for letting us into your life, into your home, into that moment when you told your wife, so thank you very much.
And thank you. You just use the word courageous. I know many people say, Patrice, you're really courageous to talk about it. No. Yeah, I find the right moment. I find the person where I feel safe. It wasn't even my sister or my brother. I've got a big family, or my mom or my dad. It was a woman. And I'm not courageous, because when we say courageous, we feel those other kids not talking are not courageous. It's just they need support. You know, we need to create like some platform, storytelling. I think storytelling can change a lot of life. It changed. And I promise you, since I released my book, I meet so many people on the street and they say, Patrice, thank you very much. They need like big figure and people talk about. Nobody expect me to share that story, being the captain of the French national team, of Manchester United, being a leader, and suddenly coming out with this story. So I don't like the word like courageous or brave. It's just I find the right person to talk about it.
Perfect, well said. Thank you very much. In terms of time, our next speaker is Maud Berbu-Kikyo. Maud was appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council as United Nations Special Rapporteur on the sale of children, child prostitution and child pornography, and with a mandate that was renewed for a second term in May 2020. She's a Dutch lawyer who pursued most of her career in the Council of Europe. She currently serves as chair of the NGO End Child Prostitution, Child Pornography and Trafficking for Children for Sexual Purpose. The acronym is ECPAT. And throughout her successful mandates, she has been a steady and determined advocate for gender equality and the promotion of children's rights, in particular, the protection of children against all forms of violence. Maud, my question for you, Maud, is that we know, unfortunately, that sexual abuse is not the only form of violence affecting participants in sports, and that there are other forms. We've discussed, Patrice and Olivia have both referred to sexual abuse. There are other forms that are less discussed. Can you tell us about them?
Thank you, Emily. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for allowing me to address you this morning after such powerful interventions by my neighbors. It's true, Emily, sport is not immune to physical and emotional violence, to exploitation and trafficking, and sale of children. And there again, we meet denial or ignorance. But there's also a fear of finding out what's going on, because if you know, you have to do something about it. And we need the measures to stop this madness. The prevalence and impact of sexual abuse in sport have been exposed by disclosure of hundreds of victims. And as we heard, these victims and survivors overcame all kinds of obstacles to denounce a crime hidden in plain sight. And thanks to this evolution, thanks to people like Patrice and Olivia, we now know that sexual violence in sport exists and that it needs to be combated. But not everyone knows and is ready to challenge other forms of violence in sport yet. And I believe that we have to understand that this is a combination of two factors: a harmful sport culture that tolerates abuse of power and violence, and sport evolving as an irresponsible business. So the first dimension, the no gain without pain approach, is used to justify abusive training techniques, extreme and unhealthy diets, doping, bullying and hazing. All kinds of abuses by coaches have been and are still tolerated because they bring medals and trophies, because they have an unchecked power over the people they train. In the name of tradition and the country's pride, extremely young children are forced to enroll in dangerous training and have a slave-like life, a life deprived of their rights to health, education, family life, leisure, participation, and protection from violence. All rights guaranteed by numerous international standards. Then there is the consideration of athletes as products in a very profitable business which opens the door to many forms of exploitation, in particular children. They are less discussed in the media, but they have enormous implications. Financial power is used to draw children and their families who are in economic hardship into unfair practices over which they have no control. Recruiters may buy children for competitive training, treating child athletes as commodities with no rights, whose value depends on their capacity to work and from which they expect to make a rapid profit. Children are transferred from one country to another and find themselves in an unknown setting with an uncertain legal status which binds them to their employer. Reports have emerged of children being recruited in developing countries and sold to play in basketball or soccer teams. And behind such recruitment, there's a system involving coaches, recruitment agencies, and high-level financial transactions, with some children being kept in poor living conditions, having to pay huge fees to their coaches and ending up in very difficult situations if they're not placed in a team. Young talents are enrolled in football academies frequently face abuses with arduous training schedules and little or no say in their career choices. Even if transferred to big clubs, once they turn 18, they will generally be immediately loaned out to other smaller clubs on so-called third-party ownership schemes with no say on their destinies, in direct violation of FIFA's regulations. Unfortunately, all these children and young people remain under the radar and exposed to all sorts of violence. So, distinguished members of the Parliamentary Assembly, if we want to uphold sport values and sport to be safe, we must tackle the harmful sport culture and sport as an irresponsible business that overlooks human rights. And if I may, I have 4 suggestions, 4 kind of measures. The first one, changes in sports governance and regulations. These include measures to embed human rights and survivors' voices in the operations and governance of all sport bodies. Although all existing human rights standards apply to sport, these would need to be translated to the reality of sports. And that could be done through the promotion and adoption of an international safe sport code embedded in the International Olympic Code. Second, measures to strengthening safeguarding at national level and in international competitions. Third, measures to increase sport accountability, so important, as we heard also from Olivia just now, and Patrice, making sure that athletes can access independent and safe reporting systems. I have participated in the consultation that FIFA has just concluded, a very inclusive process, to consider the establishment of an independent a global safe sport entity. And I clearly see the need for such an entity, and I encourage FIFA to continue working towards this aim. And I also trust that the IOC will support these efforts. And fourth, research, very badly needed, about the prevalence and the impact of violence in sport, its drivers, and the measures that can efficiently tackle it, in particular in the Global South. If these measures are not taken, sport will only be safe for abusers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maud. I won't editorialise after each speaker, if you forgive me, in the interest of time and giving people time to ask questions. I will move on to the speaker, but thank you very much. Our next speaker is Joyce Cook. Joyce Cook, CBE, OBE, is one of the world's leading voices on inclusion, anti-discrimination and sustainable development in sport, having been active in the sector for more than 20 years. In September 2019, she became FIFA's first ever Chief Social Responsibility and Education Officer, leading the organisation's human rights, safeguarding and environmental works. In April 2022, Joyce announced that she was returning to the UK and would be assuming a new role as FIFA Senior Advisor to the President's Office. In her new position, Joyce is leading FIFA's efforts to establish an independent, multi-sports, multi-agency, international safe sport entity. Joyce, my question for you is that FIFA has recently completed an independent, multi-stakeholder consultation process to consider the creation of the multi-sport entity to support victims and international federations in addressing cases of violence after falling under their jurisdiction. Can you briefly highlight for us some of the key needs that were identified in that consultation?
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity today. And I too would like to pay testimony to Patrice and to Olivia for sharing their stories with us. We, of course, in football have not been immune to cases of abuse. We also understand very clearly that what we are seeing is the tip of the iceberg. In considering what should be done, we understood very well that we needed to reach out to many experts in this field, and most of all to survivors in sport themselves. We undertook a consultation in 2 parts, and we have had the privilege to share with this committee in the past our own safeguarding work, the FIFA Guardians programme at FIFA, and our initial steps in undertaking an extensive consultation, a global consultation of more than 230 stakeholders and experts around the world to identify the prevailing gaps and to consider and test whether an independent international entity would make sense. In November last year, we convened a multi-stakeholder interim steering group and secretariat that was appointed to consider the creation of an international multisport entity, together with 7 international sports federations, and to make key recommendations for those founding sports. A further 40 global experts were convened to support this work, and a dedicated global ad hoc survivors advisory group was also appointed to provide input to the whole process. The steering group, expert groups and survivors groups came from across all sectors: the UN agencies, intergovernmental and governmental entities, international and regional sports organisations, the 7 sports, the Players Union, FIFPro, survivors groups and individuals with lived experience in abuse in sport, human rights specialists and civil society organisations, the security sector and ombudspersons, child protection experts, national safe sports centres and sports integrity units, academics, health professionals and independent experts. So we feel confident that we've undertaken a very thorough process. We also made a conscious effort to ensure geographical representation at both international as well as local stakeholders. The key findings were these: that international sports federations must continue to strengthen safeguarding at national levels and improve their reporting mechanisms to ensure that incidents are firstly prevented, and when they do occur, that victims feel able to trust the systems in place and to come forward. They must be adequately supported by culturally sensitive experts throughout: counselling, care support, legal aid services, and investigations that are conducted by specialists, by trauma-informed investigators. And wherever possible, cases should be managed locally at national level. Victims in sport denounce their experiences, complaining of shame and fear of not being believed, re-traumatization due to a lack of specialist impartial expertise, and because sports systems are not designed to deal with cases of abuse, fearing or experiencing threats and repercussions that have significantly impacted or ended even their sporting careers, tipping off of perpetrators, and a fundamental lack of trust in the sports bodies concerned. This was not easy to hear, but we want to do this right. More and more cases are coming to light that cannot yet be addressed adequately at national levels, with international federations required to act as a measure of last resort in violence cases falling within their jurisdictions, whilst experiencing significant challenges in providing the trust and specialist services needed, and we can certainly testify to that as FIFA. All involved identified the clear need for an independent international multisport entity to provide these specialist services, to support victims and whistleblowers, and to provide trauma-informed investigations, and to assist those international federations in removing perpetrators from our sports. The entity's governance, mission and operations should comply with international human rights standards, and the entity should continue to centralise the voices of survivors throughout its creation and operations. The entity should be very clear on its mandate, scope, operations and processes, and cover all forms of violence, sexual, physical and psychological. It should apply the highest quality standards in the way it assesses risk, conducts investigations, engages with victims and survivors, and to ensure that it meets national reporting obligations when required to step in at a national level. The entity scope would need to be limited to those IFs that would join the entity at this time. The entity should be properly funded and based on a solidarity funding model to ensure that no international sport federations are financially prohibited from joining. International federations joining the entity should commit to building domestic capacity across their national federations, implement appropriate safeguarding policies and practices, and take remedial safeguarding measures to address any gaps identified by the entity. Membership should also be contingent on the commitment to engage with both global and regional efforts, for example, by working together with the IOC, other IFs and national authorities to map legal and policy reporting obligations, practices and procedures, and victim support services. All of us are ultimately working towards empowering support and remedy at national level. The independence and impartiality of the entity is considered to be fundamental to its success. The need to build trust across sport and the public at large, especially victims, parents and guardians and whistleblowers considering to come forward. This will be paramount and was emphasised repeatedly across the process. Without this trust, violence in sport will continue to be underreported around the world. The entity should only open its doors once operationally ready to do so, and should learn the lessons and address the challenges being faced currently by the new national entities such as the US Centre for Safe Sport. It's not an option not to act. I was asked to make that very clear from the consultation. Rather, to mitigate risks, appoint competent specialists and experts, and to ensure accountability and transparency at both national and global levels. Lastly, the consultation called for the development of an international safe sport code focusing on interpersonal violence to harmonise the safeguarding and ethics policies, rules and regulations within sports organisations and amongst public authorities around the world was considered to be essential, given the complexity of the different ways in which the international federation's codes and regulations currently establish jurisdiction and define violence and sanctions. It was something that we noted amongst the 7 international sports federations that were around the table. With a total of 23 high-level recommendations, the stakeholders, experts, and mostly the survivors involved considered that the results of this extensive global consultation process undertaken by FIFA would provide a timely reference not only for FIFA, but to sports bodies everywhere. And we are also pleased to be sharing the final report and our findings with our colleagues and friends at the IOC and as part of their newly appointed working group. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Joyce. Our next speaker is Ms. Kirsty Burrows. Kirsty leads the IOC Safe Sport Unit, which is responsible for overseeing the International Olympic Committee's commitment, strategy and approach to the prevention of harassment and abuse in sport and the protection and promotion of athlete mental health across the Olympic movement. Kirsty, the IOC has been taking steps to address harassment and abuse in sport, and I wonder if you could provide us in less than 5 minutes, forgive me, but the time I've been given is less than 5 minutes to ask you to provide an overview of the IOC's approach and key initiatives to safeguard athletes in, through and around sport. Thank you.
It's a real honour to be here today, and I'd also just like to thank Patrice and Olivia as well, and acknowledge their bravery and courage today. The IOC has been working on the area of safeguarding in sport since 2004, and with the setup of an original working group in 2014. We recognise that whilst fundamental rights can be realised through sport, sport is not inherently good. It exists within the broader context of society, and interpersonal violence is endemic in society. And it is also, as we have seen with the studies and statistics, we see, we hear, we know how prevalent it is in sport. That there are aspects of sport which can increase the risks, and there are also many things that we in sport can do to reduce the risk. But we cannot do this alone. Safeguarding is a fundamental aspect of the Olympic Charter. It's a recommendation on its own in Olympic Agenda 2020+5, which is the Olympic movement's strategic roadmap. It's a central element of the IOC Human Rights Strategy, which was launched last year, the Gender Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy, and Olympism 365, which is our strategy in terms of how Olympism can help impact the SDGs. Our work in this area covers many spheres. We have a key leadership role, which Mr. McConnell will later be speaking about, and our approach in terms of the broader leadership of the Olympic movement. We have our systems in place in terms of games time, and there's been a concerted effort over the last few years to ensure that we have consensus statements, so we're able to really recognise what is abuse in sport, taking a public health approach, define, measure, look at interventions which can ameliorate the risk, and then see how we can help to ensure these measures are put in place across the board. We recently conducted a needs assessment of Olympic international federations and found that 85% now have safeguarding policies and procedures in place. We developed a safeguarding officer course, which is a 7-month-long course of 250 learning hours developed by an international advisory board of experts from all around the world to ensure that there was a minimum standard curriculum of safeguarding. We so far have over 150 safeguarding officers, and we see that 24% of national Olympic committees now have a trained safeguarding lead. Our approach is to ensure that what we do is evidence-based, that it follows a public health approach. We cannot get this wrong, but this is an extremely complex topic. Policies are one thing, changing the culture is another. We saw and we've heard today about the normalization of behaviors in sport which are abusive. It's really essential, and there's much work that's been done, including a consensus just last week at the IOC on youth athletic development, which again includes safeguarding as a key and fundamental pillar. What we can do in sport is not just develop and implement policies and practices. Of course, these are the bedrock, but we really need to change the dynamic, develop education, and help to better inform athletes and all participants of their rights and ensure that they all have access to recourse and remedy. The onus should not be on people who have been harmed, and we recognize this. We know, for example, in cases of child sexual abuse, on average, it's 17 years for somebody to disclose. And that's why what we do also need to do is recognize that we have many wonderful people working in sport. There's a lot of work that's being done right now in terms of bystanders, helping people to understand and recognize the signs and symptoms of abuse, whether it's happening within the context of sport or within the context of other areas of society. We also recognize that this is not strictly another integrity topic. We recognize that safeguarding is often placed under integrity, but we're not talking about the integrity of sport here. We're talking about the well-being of people within sport. And that, I think, is a fundamental difference. What we need to see is actually people feeling able to come forward in their context, in their culture. We need to recognize that there is a high prevalence of abuse within the context of sport, though lower levels than are found in society, but still extremely prevalent. A recent study found minimum prevalence rates of 13% of contact sexual violence in sport. So what we also need to do is ensure that we have systems in place that recognize that and are able to develop approaches which follow safeguarding-led guidance and which recognize the need for collective action and collective responsibility. Within sport, we can implement, we can develop, we can put in place educational programs, we can really work together, and there is a huge demand within sport to really recognize the role that we can play. But sport cannot do this alone. It is something that needs collective action, collective responsibility, and to recognize that if we do this right, we can safeguard people in, through, and around sport. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Our final speaker at the end of the table, you have to forgive me, Simon Mason, because I have one line about you, which is Head of Sports Strategy, Department of Culture, Media and Sport, United Kingdom, and I don't have any biog. So forgive me for not recognising your expertise and moving straight to the question, but I'm sure you'll understand. So the question for you is what the assessment of the Department of Sport of the problem of violence in sport as perceived in the UK is, and what are its causes and needs that you have identified. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to contribute to the discussion today. As the UK government, we fully recognise the value that sport plays across our society. The UK is a nation of sport lovers, millions of people participating in sport and watching sport every week. Whilst the vast majority of those participants enjoy a very positive experience of playing sport, we can't escape the fact that violence exists across sport, and we've heard very powerful testimony today to that point from Olivia and Patrice. There is no doubt that sport can create conditions where harm can thrive. The imbalances of power in terms of age and status, high stakes with significant reward for success and significant issues with failure, expectations of long hours and sacrifice, focus on competition and constant need for improvement and to drive forward towards success. Over recent years in the UK, we've also seen some significant societal changes that are changing how people perceive issues around safeguarding and harm, whether that be decreasing trust in established organisations, scandals around non-recent abuse in a range of organisations that is shaking the trust in those organisations, greater discussion and exposure around issues of mental health and well-being, expansion of the existing inequalities that exist across our society, and the continued power imbalances and abuse that exist within those. Within sport, we've seen notable examples in recent years in the UK, particularly thinking about sports such as gymnastics and football, but many others, where we've had very public issues in relation to safeguarding and abuse. These instances have come to the fore thanks to the bravery of the survivors who brought this into the public's attention and making sure that their voices are heard. Rightly, this has made sports bodies across the UK ask themselves some really hard questions about what they need to do to improve the culture and safety for everyone who participates in their sports. As a result, we've seen some real change, driven through reports such as the White Review into gymnastics, the Sheldon Report of historic abuse in football. They're looking fundamentally at how do we improve the structures and the practices within those sports. But there is no doubt that survivors deserve better. We also recognise that these kind of behaviours and incidents of abuse, when they do occur, rightly damage the trust and confidence that the whole society has within our sporting institutions and the wider sports system in and of itself. As government, it's one of our top priorities to create a fun, safe, fair environment for where people can play sport and be physically active. That's a central part of our ambition to make a more active nation and get people moving more. In order for us to do that, we are clear that we need to address the underlying issues around culture and safety in order to achieve those objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I would like to thank my panel for being so incredibly disciplined at 10:29, and I'm looking to my chair now for some indication as to, I think, are we allowed to go until 11?
Not probably 11, maybe another 15 minutes.
Okay.
20 minutes. Yeah, we started a bit earlier, so we're actually now ahead of time.
It also depends on questions.
Okay, that's wonderful. I might, if I could, Patrice, you mentioned children. I'm going to open up the session to the floor, but there was something I didn't ask, Patrice. When you mentioned children and children's voices not being here in the room, can I ask you, in terms of athletes discussing the problem between themselves, what's your experience of that? Is it that people are worried and feel that they should hide, ignore? What is the experience of that?
It's taboo, and people don't want to talk about that because they feel really uncomfortable. I will share a story I forget to say. When I was playing for Monaco, the police called me and said, Mr. Evra, we got some complaint about other kids. They live with this head teacher and they complain about being touched or whatever. Did it happen to yourself? And I say, no. Then the policeman say, are you sure, Mr. Evra? And I say no again. And I hang up the phone. And I live for so many years with that feeling as a coward. Because saying that to this policeman, I will maybe save other children. So I let down many children. And people always were, Patrice, you're such a good person, whatever. I never feel as a good person because in that moment I let down so many children because I lied to the police. And ask me why. Before I was like, maybe because of my fame, what people will think about me. But no, it's because when those things happen to you, when a trauma happened, you just erase it from your memory. I remember my mom, when I tell her what's happened, she was like, we need to find him, we need to put him in jail, I will kill him. I say, no, mommy. First of all, I don't even remember his face. Because you just like erase it. So that's why for them it's really difficult to talk, and especially in football, we got such a toxic masculinity. Then if a player come and say, this happened to me, you don't want to play with that player. I have a story when I was playing for Juventus, and he was one player, we were on the plane, and he was crying. So I came close to him, I said, why are you crying? He said, no, Patrice, because I'm watching this movie, and every time I'm watching this movie, I'm crying. So my first reaction, I came back to my seat, I talk with my fellow man, another teammate. I say, please don't say that to anyone, but he was crying watching a movie. And he didn't say nothing. Soon as we land, in front of everyone, he said, do you think we can go to the war with this player? And he's just crying by watching a movie? And I regret it, because now my emotions are really open, and maybe I should have cried with that player instead of laughing at him. So even crying in football is not allowed. So imagine for you to talk about your experience of being sexually abused. It's impossible. Myself, if I say it when I was playing, I don't think I will get the same respect by other players. But now I retire and I talk about it. Yes, people are in shock and surprised. But back in the day, if I open myself, I'm not sure I will have the same career, because also football is a tough world. I'm a different man now. I can open my emotion. I can cry when I watch a movie. But back in the day, I don't know if this Patrice will survive. So it's really complicated.
Thank you so much. I'll open questions to the floor. Thank you, Tonya. Thank you. Do you go ahead?
My name is Tonya Antoniazzi. I'm the Member of Parliament for Gower, which is Swansea in South Wales, and a sub-member of the committee. This has been really fascinating. I used to play rugby for Wales many moons ago, and I was part of a group of women that exposed the Welsh Rugby Union to sexism and misogyny and bullying that was going on and has been going on for many years. And through the work that I've done, it was really interesting to listen to Maud and to Joyce, well, to all of you, but particularly what Joyce was saying about what you've been doing at FIFA and what you're working on. But my problem is, as a parliamentarian, I went to the Welsh Government and I told them that I had whistleblowers come to me that wished to speak to them, and they put measures in place which meant that they had to put it in writing, and people do not want to expose themselves. Women did not want to say that they had been, they didn't want to be publicly out and shamed. They wanted to keep it. They wanted it to be dealt with. They wanted it to go away. They wanted to know that the system would change. The system didn't change. They had to go public with it, and it's really disappointing that they had to put themselves in that situation. I know now that sporting resolutions are taking that on, and they will, the WRU has seen some change, and it will change. Whether that change will be long-lasting and whether we will see it at an international level, there's two. So my main question really, and I think it's more than Joyce, I'd kind of like to answer it. Who holds governing bodies to account? They only hold themselves to account. And that is what I have learned, because government doesn't. It has at a UK government level, but when you have smaller devolved countries, it doesn't. And there has to be a responsibility there for us in this committee as well to look at that. And just to say, this is an endemic problem which has been touched on at all levels, and when it happens to children and they're your children, that's when it really, really cuts through. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question, and I'm really sorry that you had that experience as well. You can imagine a lot of discussion was had with many experts and survivors across this whole process. You know, what is clear is that more and more we're seeing international sports federations, and it's certainly something we're experiencing at FIFA, that are being called upon by the victims as a matter of last resort, not only within the sport, because actually as well the judicial systems in the respective countries are not yet effective or trusted. And rightly, victims are wanting perpetrators removed, and they're wanting justice as well in that process. In terms of ensuring the confidentiality of those that come forward and protecting them, we've all begun to talk about trauma-informed. We are really working hard at FIFA to understand what that really means, and understanding that means putting the victim first and foremost. It's, of course, important, and investigative journalism is incredibly important, but I personally hope, we at FIFA hope, that we can get to a stage where we are able to put the systems in place nationally, and I understand from many experts that we are looking at least 10 to 15 years to make a real impact on that level across the world. And in the meantime, that we are able to provide an international solution. But it has to be independent, it has to be impartial and separated from the sports themselves, and that has been abundantly clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will take 4 questions now. Linda Helleland, Fiona O'Loughlin, I see in the corner. And then I'm sorry, gentlemen, I can't see your names, but maybe to the left of Fiona O'Loughlin in the order as you sit. Ah. Okay, do you want to start?
Yes, my name is Linda Helleland. I'm representing the Norwegian Parliament. And thank you to Olivia and Patrice for a very strong message. My question to you is what do you demand of our committee? How could we, in a more efficient way, work with this issue when it comes to, for instance, clear policies guideline? Is there, or should there be a more independent oversight and monitoring to so a mechanism to that could be efficient in that way? Should we take initiatives when it comes to education, more education and awareness programs? Should there be a safe reporting mechanism? How can we as politicians, both national and on the international level, work more efficient? Because the sport organization, I think they do what they can do, but how can the political level contribute to this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I've been asked to do, my lovely panel and speakers, is to take a few questions, give you time to consider the questions as they go, and then we'll come back to the panel to answer the questions. Is that okay? Because if we take an individual question, we mightn't get people an opportunity to speak. You look like you're ready. Yeah, okay, it's fair enough. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's really simple. Like, I'm doing my part. I'm using my platform. We need to raise the awareness. Like, for example, my foundation is calling Evra Foundation. I say I will never use my name because it's not about me, it's about other children. But the problem, I don't know if it's a coincidence, the E as Evra is end, the V is violence, and R is raise, and A, awareness. So even my name, sometimes I think, is a destiny. But what we have to do is a lot of program behind. Is a lot of people are working really hard about it. But we need to prioritize it. That's what we want. Because we prioritize other campaign, other movement, other things. They're really important. But we want ending the violence against children at the same level as, like Olivia was saying, about the anti-doping, about the discrimination. We saw a lot of campaign about racism, but because it's taboo. And that's what we want. The media have a massive role to play on it, because storytelling changed a lot of life. So we know it's education, because we're talking about sport. The problem is the society. We are really aware of that. But football, in particular, is such a powerful platform. But if we want to use it and football isn't safe, or we want us to change millions of children's lives or changing the world, football has to be safe. It's an emergency, so we have to prioritize it. Because when it's other, for example, I'm talking about the Super League. In 24 hours, we shut down the project of the Super League. 24 hours. A project didn't even start. So I'm like, why we don't have the same energy for the children? That's what I ask. I see a lot of pundits, we're talking, the fan, we're fighting. But when it's about the children, about the races, we don't have the same energy. And I've been traveling a lot. I've been talking with a lot of presidents. And as soon as you talk about children, you can see, even this room, you can feel the energy. People were sad. No, we don't need empathy. We need change. We need to be like with more energy, more passion, more determination. I know it's a sensitive subject, but I'm not here to ask for any pity. I'm asking to change the life of billions of children.
Two seconds. You know, for me personally, you know, I feel that we can implement and put in all the policies we like. At the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. And that piece of paper is not being executed. And that is what is creating distrust between the victims and the federations. And they're looking for people like me. I'm one human being. I'm currently dealing with almost 1,400 cases as one person. Then over and above that, you know, we've got the reporting mechanisms. Where do the victims go? Because they don't know where to go. And when they do go somewhere, they get shut down. Take my personal story. I told somebody that I had been raped 2 weeks after I had been raped. I was disbelieved. That somebody was my mother. That mother, that same mother, and my same father testified against me in court, and to this day do not believe me. I am not the only one this has happened to. It's happened to many people. So we as victims need to know that we can go somewhere where we will believe. I had no reason. Patrice had no reason to disclose what had happened to us. For what gain? Our lives fell apart before we got to a position where we can sit here today. So it's up to you to put place. The words left my brain. To put what's the word I'm looking
Less
for?
what people can fix.
So, you know, just to implement strategies and implement things for people to be able to go to and be comfortable that they will be treated with the respect that they deserve as a victim. A victim, a perpetrator, is not innocent until proven guilty. We are not lying until proven otherwise. That whole brain, that whole thought mechanism should just be scrapped. We had no reason to lie.
Thank you. I'll go to Fiona O'Loughlin.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you for your insightful moderation as well, too. And thank you to all of the panel, to Olivia and Patrice, for sharing your stories, for being brave and courageous enough to do that, to help support others that are in, sadly, the same positions, and to try to prevent this happening again. And I get what you're saying, Olivia, in relation to your last point. Victims need to have that support to become survivors, and I think that's where there is a journey from one to the other. So putting those supports in place to empower the victim and to support them, understand them, listen to them, believe them, is hugely, hugely important. Coming from Ireland, where we have a love of sport, we're hugely passionate about it, and very conscious of all of the many volunteers that we have in communities right around the country. And while I understand and appreciate the many measures that are being put in place on a professional level, there is a big difference between professional sport and amateur sport. So in terms of how at a volunteer level within our communities we put those in place is hugely important. I have two questions. One is really around the bystander, because I think the bystander in all of these cases is hugely important. And far too often there is a peer or a gang mentality that people step away when they feel, when they see, they witness, or they have a suspicion that something is happening. And they're afraid to use their voice maybe to stop it happening, or to speak to somebody in authority or in governance. So how we support that role. And then secondly, obviously within our role within the Council of Europe, we're very much focused on human rights, and it is a human right not to be abused. It's a very, very basic human right. So do you feel, and I suppose this goes from the previous questioner as well, that in terms of our role, when we're monitoring countries in terms of abuses, etc., do you feel that this is an area that we should actually add to our monitoring to be able to send and bring very strong messages. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you very much for the questions. From a sports perspective, I think it would certainly help us in terms of vetting in your membership, in working with national governments to ensure that mandatory vetting and screening of any volunteers or individuals, employees, coaches, etc., that are going to work with children, so that we can try to ensure that perpetrators don't jump from one region or one sport to another, which is currently the case, and we have evidence that that is happening. So that will help a lot. And I think in general, Kirsty said it and we've said it repeatedly, this is not something that sports can tackle alone. So evermore we need to work together, and your help and continued support in that regard will be invaluable. We have to do this together. It's not something that we can do on our own. And we need those judicial systems at national level as we build and strengthen the multi-sport environments, frameworks. We need to ensure that those judicial systems are also working around the world in an effective manner, so that when we ban a perpetrator from our sports, we can be sure that criminal justice is sought and actually should be priorities we all know and understand. Thank you.
Kirsty? Yeah, I'd just like to say, I think there's so much in this question, these discussions, because I think, I agree, the judicial part, you know, this is, sport can do so much, state has a huge responsibility as well. And what I think is really, really challenging is that we don't see, for example, even in terms of across society, when we have cases of abuse, we've heard so many things today about how difficult it is to speak about, how difficult it is to come forward, how actually when there is investigation as to abuse, for example, forensic medical evidence, very rarely actually available. It is extremely challenging, and we see that there's a dark number in terms of conviction versus prevalence rate of abuse in sport. So what can we do? I think what you were saying about the bystander thing is essential, and I think that's essential within sport and outside of sport as well. Some recent research found that coaches would intervene on abusive behaviour if they considered that other coaches would as well. So it's really important to understand bystander behaviours, to set the tone, to set the expectation across all levels of sport. What we can do is set where our expectation is and what we expect in sport and what is fundamentally against sport, whether it's reached a criminal threshold or not. What do we not accept as appropriate behaviour within the context of sport? I think it's essential to be able to work and look at this bystander phenomenon and see how can we help people to recognise the signs and symptoms of abuse no matter where it is happening. We see huge cross-victimisation as well, whether the abuse has happened in the setting of sports, of the home, or of the school environment. There is a lot that we can do to educate, to recognise, and then we need to look at the response systems, but also know that there's judicial and non-judicial remedies. There are many differences in what people coming forward actually want to see as the resolution or the outcome, and it will take them a lot of time. So what I'd like to say is that, yes, drawing on many of the points from before, we can do a lot within the context of sport, but I think, back to the original question, what would we ask you to do? I think it's really how can we work together, because that judicial aspect is a crucial element, and that really doesn't come from the sports field. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Morgan Jensen.
Thank you very much also. Thank you for all interventions in a theme that, well, I think it's obvious for what has been said here, has no awareness or a very little awareness among the audience to sport, but also among politicians, and how to change that, because I think when you talk about violence in sport, what is people thinking? They're thinking about fan groups fighting each other. That's the impression of that's violence in sports. But as it's now been very clear here, the sports organization itself creates violence and abuses among youngsters and children. And I think the most important thing, both to make public take this serious, but also politicians, is the visibility, is to picture quite clear that this is a problem, this is happening. And two ways to do that, of course, the testimonies that we also heard here today is obvious, the most strongest tool, I think. But also, and that was what my question was, of course, facts. What do we know? Knowledge. And you, Mrs. de Boer, you mentioned we need research. And I would like to know, because we politicians can also give resources to research. Where do we need research? Where do we miss knowledge? Because that's also something that we can use to convince our colleagues, politicians, on that this is a problem and we have to handle it.
Maud?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I truly believe that there is a need for further research, because the question is, do we have enough evidence? And from the outset, I would like to underline that, of course, when it comes to research, I think it's important to realize that we're not only talking about elite sport, but also the sport practiced every day, where children are subject to different forms of violence in the locker rooms, on the journey outside, away from their parents, and so on. And again, for all these forms of violence, whether it's sexual violence, physical violence, emotional violence, you have these obstacles for children to report. For the reasons we've heard extensively today, there is no proper access to safe reporting mechanism. And so the research is really, the research so far which has been carried out it's relatively recent, and it's mostly undertaken in the global north. And of course, for the Council of Europe, that is very relevant. But on the other hand, apart from the fact that it has mostly focused on sexual violence, the need for extending this research to all forms of violence is obvious to me, also because of the interrelationship between the different forms of violence. There's no, it can move from emotional violence to sexual violence, grooming to rape. I mean, the scenarios are very clear. And I just wanted to mention that in the UK, there has been a very interesting research carried out by a group of researchers, which involved, it was research with adults who experienced during their childhood different forms of violence. And that research was very interesting and could be extrapolated to cover the world at large, I believe. But what is interesting are the following elements. First of all, that the prevalence of interpersonal violence against children inside sport is slightly lower than outside sport. Yeah. The second element was that the prevalence inside sport is higher for boys than girls in the research country. This concerned 6 countries in the European Union and also included the UK. The figures for each form of interpersonal violence were broadly similar across countries, and the prevalence for any form of interpersonal violence against children is 68% at the recreational level and 84% at the international level. And last but not least, children belonging to ethnic minority groups are significantly more likely to experience abuse. So I think it's important that all this is further clarified, because policies and measures, concrete measures, will have to be based on research and evidence-based to be credible and to be efficient. And I want to insist of the need to develop this research to the global south, because I mean, you have heard in my initial statements also how many boys, especially, but also girls, are being moved to the global north as victims of trafficking, with excuses of a future career in sport, and at the end of the day, they end up in sex trafficking circuits and so on. So, but on the basis of these figures which this research team has produced, we have, by extrapolating it, we couldn't, this cases study, that's the name of the study, we can potentially speak about 200 million child victims of sexual violence in sport in the global south. So as chair of Expert International, we offer to carry out that research, provided we have the funding, to shed light on all this. And we are seeking support to carry out this study that will help to overcome denial and ignorance, identify good practices, and to move towards efficient and sustainable change, as we have done in the past with sexual abuse and exploitation in travel and tourism, which has been very successful and which eventually led to the adoption of a code which binds hotels, locations where tourists are staying, and where otherwise, if there were no adherence to these very important principles in the code, there would be much more child victims. So for sports, improving access to reporting potentially means many more victims coming forward. And that, of course, takes courage, but it's an overdue move. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maud. I'm afraid I have to take a final grouping of questions. Kim Valentine, Birgit Thorensen and Amanda Sater.
Yes, thank
and
you.
what I will ask is that I've been advised to hear the questions first, if I might, and then we'll open it to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all the interesting interventions. My question is about child abuse. I think child abuse is everywhere where children are, and we have seen it through history that it's where the child abusers are. So I think that we need to be very focused on best practice here and find out what kind of measures, what kind of safeguarding procedures, what kind of background checks actually work. Could you be a little more specific? I'm talking about you as experts. What actually works here? Do we know that now, or are we still finding out what works? Where are we on that scale?
Okay, thank you. So that's what works in terms of best practice. Birgit Thorensen, would you give me your question, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Birgit Thorensen. I'm a parliamentarian from Iceland. I would like to ask Mr. Evra, and thank you very much for your testimony, about believing the victim. Our national team is very popular in Iceland. And what is your opinion if a player that is accused of violence and sexual harassment continues to play for the team?
What would you prefer? Do you want to take that now?
Take that now, quickly.
Patrice would prefer to take that now.
Thank you. He won't survive because, like I see, the abuse in football world is considered as a weakness. So first of all, his teammate, they will reject him automatically. Being the captain of many teams, I was the one to make sure like the player feels safe about whatever, about discrimination or being abused or being bullied, because bullying in football is something normal. Like a player when he comes in the dressing room and slapping him and making joke is something normal. So that's what we have to stop, that normality. And I would like to back to Morgan what he say. When we talk about violence in football, we just think about the fan, the hooligan fighting. People are not aware. People don't know about that. And I always say, no human being born as a murderer, as a racist, or as a rapist. It's about education and create a safe environment, like Olivia said. And I don't want to be here and say we need more program, we need more people going to talk with people, because we're doing it. But we don't prioritize it. And I'm someone really straightforward. I'm so amazed we're just talking about those kind of cases just now. But we're talking about saving the environment, discrimination or whatever, but protecting those children, they are the future. So why we don't start from there? And I know, I can say like also people going to see the parents helping them because it's from home. And even some kids are being abused by their own parents, by their own mother, their own father, but they can't talk. But me, I just want to, we stop being hypocrite and make sure we fix this matter and prioritize it. Because talking about program, education, whatever, people are doing it. Like some people are doing an amazing job. And the problem, we don't put it in light. But with the media, like I gave the example of Vinicius Jr. when he get abused by some football fan, and suddenly everyone posts on social, you see the effect, the massive effect. And the politician, they have to put it, to prioritize it on their agenda. But you can only hurt them when you touch their pocket or their image. And that's the truth. That's why I say we need to be straight. But to answer to your question, Beijing, right now in the football world, if a teammate come and he say, I've been abused, or he won't survive. His teammates, they will, maybe even the manager will say, I don't want him in my team anymore. And that's the truth. He hurt, but that's the truth.
Okay, a final question from Amanda Sater, and then we'll answer both Kim Valentine's and Amanda Sater's questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda Sater, a member of the House of Lords. I wanted to just say thank you for all of you coming today, and particularly Patrice and Olivia for your very brave testimonies. Back in 2017, DCMS asked Baroness Tanya Gray-Thompson to do an independent report into the duty of care in sport. It was an excellent report. Moving forward to 2023 and to listening to everybody today, we've really got to prioritise this subject, these challenges, all the barriers and all the issues that we've got. And Patrice, you said it very, very eloquently today about the prioritisation. What I'd like to do is not ask a question, but a request that this committee put a timetable on this, that we actually challenge all of us here today to put a timetable for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if we just finally to the panel, the question on best practice and what works.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take the question on what works, and also just flag that for many years we've got a research fund, an IOC research fund, including funds for prevention of harassment and abuse in sport and mental health in sport and many other areas. So there is research funds available. We really do take an evidence-based approach, and as I mentioned, a public health approach, and that means we really have to define what works. We have to understand. We really have to look and see. The truth is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We know that the risk of abuse in sport is elevated when three factors align, and that's when you've got high athlete vulnerability, a perpetrator with high motivation to harass or abuse, and low protection mechanisms. There are many things that we can do within each of those things to be able to reduce athlete vulnerability, to reduce the access of perpetrators with a high motivation to harass or abuse, to be able to access vulnerable athletes or all people. There are things we can do to increase the protection mechanisms. But the truth is that more work needs to be done looking at validated interventions in many different contexts to see. And there will be no magic bullet. We say, of course, we're based in Switzerland, so we use the Swiss cheese metaphor. Effectively, there are many different steps. Imagine pieces of Swiss cheese and they've each got holes in them, right? At some point, there will be, if you have a risk and you have an athlete at the other side, at some point, the risk might be able to pass because the Swiss cheeses are lined up and it happens that the holes are all in the same place, so the risk can pass through. And then there'll be the one thing that blocks it. And that can be different each time. It can be education on recognizing signs and symptoms of abuse. It can be education. It can be criminal records checks. It can be mandatory disclosure documents. It can be safe recruitment policies and practices. It can be many different aspects, many different things. There is no one-size-fits-all. But a lot of our work is in trying to ensure that we do take, and I mentioned we have an IOC consensus, the third IOC consensus on abuse in sport, which is being convened this September, to really continue to look at what works, and then to try and help ensure that that is disseminated across the entire Olympic movement. Thank you.
Just to add to Kirsty, I think if we're frank as sports bodies, we don't really wholeheartedly know yet. We know what the best practice principles are, but for all of us, we have started our journey of prevention, probably too late if we're really honest, but we have understood, and for FIFA, it was actually the non-recent cases here in the Sheldon report that brought to our attention that we need to focus on this area. So our safeguarding journey began in earnest and building capacity across our 211 member associations in 2019. We have now commissioned Loughborough University to undertake an extensive study to see how effective the FIFA Guardians programme is at this stage, which will conclude in 25. And I think that would tell us more clearly. But I think the other thing which we're seeing across all sectors, not only sports, is that we need more trained safeguarding officers, because there is not enough, and we are all earnestly working to train safeguarding officers in sport. But in addition to that, we need to be very clear that it's up to all of us, and in fact our own FIFA Guardians programme strapline is it's up to all of us. And of course you have the Start to Talk campaign at the Council of Europe. But we have to have everybody understand this isn't one person's job, it's everybody's job. And then lastly, we're beginning to embed obligations into our funding, development funding programme, into our competitions and codes of conduct. But of course, they're only as good as we can ensure accountability. So we need independent checks and balances, which we've begun certainly now at FIFA.
Thank you, Joyce. Olivia, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I just have a final quickly with something I want to say, which Joyce pretty much said now. But it's incumbent on all of us as adults to take care of children, and we would take care of our children, our grandchildren. So what I'm trying to understand is, why is it so difficult for us to take care of other children as well and be the protectors of those other children? There are laws in countries where it states very clearly that you even suspect abuse of a child and you don't report it, you can face criminal charges. Why is those laws not executed? Why are they constantly just left on the side? It is our job, all of us sitting here, to start protecting our children today. I should have had all of you and the entire tennis community protecting me when they knew what was happening to me, but nobody had the gumption to do anything about it. And to sit here today and speak to you about my experience is a re-traumatization and having to relive what I went through 40 years ago. And that is not fair on me, and it's not fair on our future generations.
Olivia, thank you very much. With that, we will close. I'm looking to my chairperson now, and just to thank my victim, and not my victim, Olivia as a victim, and Patrice as a survivor. Thank you so much, and to our experts on the panel for your contribution here today. Thank you so much.
In the name of our chair, I want to thank you, Emily Logan, for this moderation, and I thank the whole panel for this very, very impressive first round of discussion. And I think we are all very impressed, and I remember years ago we had a meeting in Georgia, in Tbilisi, this committee together with the social committee, and we worked out an action plan against sexual abuse and protect children in sport. And this 10 action plan with 10 necessary steps is still today working, and I'm always using, for example, in my parliament, and say, look, these are the 10 points of Council of Europe and what you fulfilled and that.